Claire Bennett had spent enough time working in expensive restaurants to understand that wealth created its own invisible walls. Some people entered a room and were immediately noticed because of their name, their clothes, or the influence they carried with them. Others moved through the same space unnoticed, remembered only when someone needed a glass refilled, a table cleaned, or a problem quietly solved before it disturbed the people who believed the evening belonged to them. I had become very familiar with being the second kind of person. At 28 years old, I worked as a waitress at one of downtown Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, a place where every night brought in executives, investors, celebrities, and people whose conversations were filled with numbers most ordinary people could never imagine. The dining room was always carefully arranged, from the lighting to the music to the smallest details on each table. My responsibility was to make sure everything felt effortless. Guests were supposed to remember the experience, not the person who made it possible. Over time, I had accepted that invisibility was sometimes easier than being judged. When people saw a waitress, they rarely wondered about her dreams, her struggles, or the life she lived outside those walls. They saw a role, a uniform, someone who existed to serve them. I learned which customers wanted conversation and which preferred privacy. I learned when to approach a table and when to quietly disappear. I learned how to remain polite, even when kindness was not always returned. That Friday night began like every other busy evening. The restaurant was full, the sound of conversations filled the room, and the warm lights reflected across tables covered with expensive dishes and untouched expectations. I moved between guests, carrying plates, checking orders, and making sure every detail was handled before anyone had a reason to complain. I thought I understood how the night would go. Then I walked toward one of the main tables and discovered that some people were not interested in whether I did my job well. They were interested in deciding whether I belonged there at all. A group of wealthy guests had been talking about business, investments, and the kind of success that allowed people to speak as though the world naturally made room for them. After I finished helping another customer nearby, one of the women called me over. At first, I assumed she needed assistance. I smiled and prepared to answer whatever request she had. But she was not looking for service. Her eyes moved slowly over my uniform, my appearance, and the way I stood beside the table before finally meeting my gaze. It was a familiar expression, the kind I had seen before from people who believed they could understand my entire life within a few seconds. She asked whether I was sure I was in the right place, and although her words sounded polite, the meaning behind them was impossible to miss. Some environments were not made for everyone, she implied. I had heard versions of those comments before. About my appearance. About the way I dressed. About whether someone like me could truly belong in certain rooms. Usually, I ignored them because I had learned that dignity was not something you protected by proving you were better than someone else. It was something you protected by refusing to become cruel in response. So I kept my voice calm and told her I would be happy to help with anything she needed. She smiled as if she had already won. The people around the table noticed what was happening. A few guests looked uncomfortable. Others quietly continued their conversations, hoping the moment would pass without requiring them to choose a side. The woman wanted an audience, and I understood that was the real reason she continued. She was not trying to correct me. She was trying to remind everyone in the room where she believed I belonged. I could have answered differently. I could have embarrassed her in front of everyone. I could have returned every unfair assumption she had placed on me with words sharp enough to hurt. But I had spent too many years learning that some victories were not worth the cost of losing yourself. I simply turned away. I believed the moment was over. I was wrong. A few seconds later, something changed in the room, not because anyone raised their voice or created a scene, but because one person finally decided that ignoring what was happening was no longer acceptable. That's enough. The voice came from behind me. I turned around and saw Adrian Montgomery standing near the entrance. I knew his name before I knew his face. Everyone in Chicago did. Adrian Montgomery was the kind of man people described carefully, a businessman whose decisions carried weight far beyond a single conversation. He was known for his intelligence, his influence, and the quiet control he brought into every room he entered. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, but it was not his appearance that made people pay attention. It was the certainty behind his silence. Adrian looked toward the table, then toward me. For a brief moment, I prepared myself for the same judgment I had experienced all evening. Another powerful person deciding who I was before knowing anything about me. But something about his expression was different. He was not looking at my uniform. He was not looking at my position. He was looking at the situation itself. When the woman attempted to explain what had happened, expecting Adrian to agree with her, he simply listened. Then he calmly said that a person's value was not determined by the uniform they wore, but by the way they treated others. The table became quiet because nobody expected someone like Adrian Montgomery to challenge the behavior of people who were used to getting their way. I looked at him, confused by why a man with his influence would involve himself in something so small. When I quietly told him that I appreciated what he had done but did not need someone else to fight my battles, I noticed a change in his expression. Not anger, not disappointment, something closer to curiosity. Most people approached Adrian Montgomery because they wanted something from him. They wanted opportunities, protection, approval, or access to the world he controlled. But I was the first person that night who looked him in the eyes and asked him not to save me. I did not know it then, but that small moment would become the beginning of a story neither of us expected. Interesting, he said softly. You are not what people think you are. And before I could understand why those words mattered, Adrian Montgomery walked away. The woman who had spoken to me suddenly had nothing to say. I looked at Adrian, confused by why someone like him would care. After a moment, I said quietly, I appreciate what you did, but I do not need someone to fight my battles for me. Something changed in his expression. Surprise. Maybe even curiosity. Most people approached Adrian Montgomery because they wanted something from him. I was the first person who looked him in the eyes and asked him not to save her. Interesting, he said softly. You are not what people think you are. I almost smiled. Neither are you. I walked away before he could respond. At that moment, I thought that was the end of our conversation. I did not know that night would become the beginning of a truth that would change both of our lives. Because Adrian Montgomery believed he had protected a waitress from humiliation. He had no idea he had just met the woman whose hidden past would explain why she was never someone anyone could simply overlook. I thought the strangest part of that night would be seeing Adrian Montgomery defend someone like me. I was wrong. The strangest part was realizing that the most powerful man in the room was more interested in my reaction than in the gratitude everyone else expected me to show. The next morning, I returned to my normal life. At least, I tried to. The restaurant was the same. The tables were the same. The morning sunlight coming through the windows looked exactly the same. But something felt different. People were looking at me differently. Some employees whispered when I walked by. Others suddenly became more polite. I knew why. Adrian Montgomery had changed the atmosphere without saying much. That was something powerful people could do. They did not always need to make announcements. Sometimes their presence alone changed how others behaved. But I did not want that. I did not want respect because someone influential decided I deserved it. I wanted respect because I earned it. That was something I had always believed. Later that afternoon, my manager called me into the office. I expected a complaint about the incident. Instead, he handed me a letter. Someone contacted the restaurant, he said. They wanted to recognize how professionally you handled the situation. I looked at the letter but already knew who it was from. Adrian. I placed it back on the desk. I appreciate the thought, but I do not want special treatment. My manager looked confused. Claire, most people would be happy about this. I smiled politely. I am happy when people notice good work. I just do not want people thinking I only received recognition because someone powerful spoke for me. That was the truth. I had spent years building my life without depending on anyone. Not because I believed I was better than others. Because I knew what it felt like to lose everything and have no choice but to stand on my own. That evening, when my shift ended, I found Adrian waiting outside the restaurant. I was surprised. Do you always appear when people are trying to leave? I asked. A small smile appeared on his face. Only when people avoid conversations. I crossed my arms. And what conversation are we avoiding? He looked at me for a moment before answering. The one where you pretend you were not affected by what happened. His words caught me off guard. Most people focused on the insult. Adrian noticed the silence afterward. He noticed the way I handled it. You were watching me, I said. Yes. His honesty surprised me. Why? He looked toward the city streets. Because everyone in that room reacted the same way. They followed the crowd. You did not. I did not know how to respond. Adrian Montgomery was used to people trying to impress him. I was used to people underestimating me. Somehow, neither of us understood the other. You do not know anything about me, I said. He looked back at me. That is true. A pause followed. But I know enough to know you are not ordinary. I almost laughed. I serve food for a living. That is what you do, he replied. It is not who you are. That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected, because it sounded similar to something my father used to say. Never let a title become your identity. Never let other people decide your value. I had not heard those words in years. Why are you really interested in me? I asked. For the first time, Adrian seemed unsure of his answer. I do not know yet. That honesty was unexpected. A man like Adrian Montgomery could have created any answer he wanted. Instead, he admitted uncertainty. Then he continued. There is something about your story that does not make sense. My expression changed. What do you mean? I looked into your background. I immediately became cautious. You investigated me? I was curious, he said. Your records are incomplete. I looked away. I had spent years making sure nobody asked those questions. Everyone has a past, I said. Adrian nodded. Yes, but most people leave traces of theirs. Silence filled the space between us. He was right. My past did not disappear naturally. I had carefully closed every door behind me. Maybe I wanted a fresh start, I said. Adrian studied me quietly. Maybe. He did not push. That surprised me. But people who start over usually leave something behind. You left almost nothing. I felt the old fear return. Not fear of Adrian. Fear of remembering. My past was not a story I wanted to tell. It was a chapter one had survived. Some things are better left alone, I said. Adrian looked at me with a calm expression. Sometimes people hide things because they are ashamed. Sometimes they hide things because they are protecting something. My heart changed for a moment. Because he was closer to the truth than he realized. I looked at him and wondered what kind of person noticed the things everyone else ignored. I thought Adrian Montgomery was searching for information. I did not realize he was about to uncover a secret that would explain why my ordinary life was never ordinary at all. I thought I had buried my past deep enough that nobody would ever find it. I was wrong. Some things do not disappear just because we stop talking about them. They wait quietly until the right person asks the right questions. After my conversation with Adrian Montgomery, I spent the entire night thinking about one sentence he said. You left almost nothing. He was right. My life before Chicago was a carefully closed door. I had changed my name, my routine, and the way I introduced myself to people. I had built a simple life where nobody knew about the family I came from or the person I used to be. And for years, that was exactly what I wanted. The next morning, I arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. I needed the familiar sounds around me. The dishes, the conversations, the movement of people. Normal things reminded me that I was still Claire Bennett. But as I prepared for the day, I noticed something different. Adrian had not just become curious. He had become careful. He was not searching for gossip. He was searching for answers. That was more dangerous because curiosity could be ignored. Respect could not. Later that week, Adrian asked if he could meet me somewhere private. I almost refused. My first instinct was always to protect the life I had created. But another part of me wanted to know why a man like him cared about a waitress he barely knew. We met at a quiet coffee shop away from the busy streets. Adrian arrived without an assistant, without the image of power that followed him everywhere. For a moment, he looked less like the man everyone feared and more like someone trying to understand a difficult story. He placed a folder on the table. I looked at it but did not touch it. Before we continue, I said, I need to know something. Adrian looked at me. What? Why are you doing this? He was quiet for a moment. Then he answered, because I recognize someone who is running from something. His honesty surprised me. Most people would have created a more impressive answer. Adrian simply told the truth. And what makes you think I am running? I asked. He looked at me carefully. Because people who are comfortable with their past do not work this hard to hide it. I looked away. He was getting too close. The folder remained between us. Finally, I opened it. Inside were basic records about my life in Chicago. Nothing personal. Nothing that should have been impossible to find. But there was one thing that caught my attention. A missing section from my history. The years before I arrived in the city. How did you find this? I asked. I have resources, he replied. That is not an answer. A small smile appeared on his face. You ask difficult questions. Someone should. For a moment, the conversation became lighter. Then Adrian returned to the folder. Claire, I am not trying to expose you. I looked at him. Then what are you trying to do? He paused before answering. Understand why someone like you chose to disappear. Those words affected me more than I expected. Someone like you. Not someone famous. Not someone wealthy. Someone who had a reason. I looked down at the coffee cup in my hands. My life before Chicago was complicated. Adrian waited. He did not rush me. That was something I noticed about him. He had power, but he did not always use it. My family had a business, I finally said. A long time ago. He listened carefully. What happened? I hesitated. Memories came back faster than I wanted. My father's office. The conversations I was too young to understand. The moment, everything changed. We lost everything, I said quietly. Adrian did not interrupt. And after that, I realized some people only care about you when your name gives them something. His expression changed slightly. Maybe he understood that feeling. So you changed your name? I nodded. I wanted people to know me without knowing where I came from. Adrian looked at me for a long moment. That explains why your records changed. But it does not explain why someone would want your past hidden. I felt a familiar tension return. The part of my story I never shared was the reason I left. Maybe nobody wanted it hidden, I said. Maybe I just wanted a different life. Adrian did not argue. Instead, he asked one final question. Claire, what was your last name before Bennett? I froze. That was the question I had spent years avoiding. A name could open doors. A name could also bring everything back. I looked at him and realized something. Adrian Montgomery was not interested in the waitress everyone ignored. He was searching for the woman behind the name. And for the first time in 8 years, I wondered if keeping my secret had protected me or simply delayed the moment when the truth would finally find me. I spent 8 years trying to become someone nobody would question. Someone ordinary. Someone who could walk into a room without people knowing my family name before they knew my own. But I was beginning to understand something. You can change your surroundings. You can change your routine. You can even change your name. But you cannot erase the person you were always meant to be. After Adrian asked me about my last name, I did not answer. Not because I did not trust him. Because saying it out loud would make everything real again. For years, I had avoided that moment. The moment when Claire Bennett disappeared and Claire Whitmore returned. The next few days, Adrian did not mention the conversation. That surprised me. I expected questions. I expected pressure. Instead, he gave me space. It was the first time someone with so much influence respected my silence. And somehow, that made me trust him more. One evening after my shift, Adrian was waiting outside the restaurant again. This time, I was not surprised. You have a habit of appearing when I am trying to go home, I said. He smiled slightly. You have a habit of avoiding important conversations. I looked at him carefully. You really do not give up, do you? Not when something matters. There was something different in the way he said it. It was not about curiosity anymore. It was about understanding. We walked to a quiet cafe nearby. The city moved around us, people rushing through their own stories without knowing ours was changing. Adrian placed the folder on the table again. But this time, he did not open it. I want you to tell me when you are ready, he said. I looked at him, surprised. That is all. That is all. I studied his expression. A man like Adrian Montgomery was used to controlling situations. Yet here he was, giving me control. Why? I asked. He looked out the window. Because someone once gave me the same choice. I waited for more, but he did not continue. I realized then that Adrian had his own hidden chapters. Maybe that was why he recognized mine. My last name was Whitmore, I finally said. The words felt heavier than I expected. Adrian became still. Not shocked. Not confused. Just quiet. Whitmore, he repeated softly. Your father was Thomas Whitmore. I looked at him immediately. You knew him? He nodded. My family knew him. Suddenly, the distance between our lives became smaller. How? I asked. Adrian leaned back. Your father was respected. He built a company based on trust. He helped people when he did not have to. Hearing that made my chest feel tight. My father was not just a memory. He was someone who had left an impact on people I never knew about. Then you know what happened, I said. Adrian looked down. I know part of it. Tell me. He hesitated. That was the first time I saw uncertainty in him. Your family did not simply disappear because of financial problems. The words stayed in the air. I had always suspected that. But hearing it from someone else changed everything. What happened? I asked. Adrian looked at me. Your father discovered that someone close to him was not being honest. I felt my hands become cold. Who? We do not know everything yet. I wanted answers. After years of silence, I wanted every missing piece. But Adrian continued carefully. Your father protected you because he believed the truth could put you in a difficult position. I looked away. He was always protecting me. Adrian nodded. That was the kind of man he was. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had been in my mind since the beginning. Why are you helping me? Adrian looked surprised by the question. Because your father once helped my family. That answer was not what I expected. I had thought Adrian was interested because of curiosity or because he wanted information. But maybe there was something deeper. A connection that existed before we ever met. What did he do? I asked. Adrian looked at the folder. He gave my family a second chance when most people would have turned away. I realized then why this mattered to him. He was not searching for a secret. He was trying to understand a debt that had never been forgotten. Before we left, Adrian handed me an old photograph from the folder. My father was standing beside a younger Adrian and another man I did not recognize. Who is he? I asked. Adrian's expression changed slightly. Someone who was once trusted by both of our families. I looked at the photograph again. A person from the past. A missing piece. A connection I never expected. As I held that picture, I understood something. My past was not just my story anymore. It was connected to Adrian's too. And the truth we were about to uncover would reveal why my father disappeared, why Adrian remembered him, and why my simple life as a waitress had never been as ordinary as everyone believed. I spent years believing that my father's disappearance was a chapter of my life that would never reopen. I thought changing my name and starting over meant I had finally escaped the questions that followed me. But I was beginning to understand something important. The past does not disappear when you stop looking at it. It simply waits for the moment when you are ready to face it. After Adrian showed me the photograph, I could not stop thinking about the man standing beside my father. A familiar face from a story I did not know. A connection between two families that I never expected. The next morning, Adrian asked me to meet him at his office. This time, I was not nervous about going. I knew I was walking toward answers, not away from them. His office was exactly what I expected. Elegant, organized, quiet. A place designed for someone who was used to making decisions. But there was something different about Adrian when I entered. He was not acting like a powerful businessman. He looked like someone searching through memories. I found something else, he said. He placed a small box on the table. I looked at it carefully. What is that? Something your father left behind. My heart changed immediately. My father had always been careful. He planned everything. He never did anything without a reason. Adrian opened the box slowly. Inside were old documents, a handwritten note, and another photograph. I picked up the note first. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. Just seeing it again brought back memories I had spent years trying to keep quiet. The note was short. Claire, if you are reading this, it means the truth finally found you. I had to pause. Those words felt impossible. My father had known this day might come. He expected someone to discover this. I asked. Adrian nodded. Your father was prepared. I continued reading. The note explained that my father trusted very few people. Not because he disliked others, but because he understood that trust was something earned through actions. He mentioned one person who had always helped him when things became complicated. Adrian's father. I looked at Adrian. Your family knew about all of this? Not everything, he said, but enough to know your father was trying to protect something important. I placed the note down. What was he protecting? Adrian opened another document. It was a record connected to my father's company. At first, I only saw numbers and signatures. Then I noticed something. One name appeared several times. Richard Hale. The same name Adrian had mentioned before. He was my father's business partner, I said quietly. Adrian nodded. Yes, he was someone your father trusted. The words were difficult to hear, because betrayal always feels different when it comes from someone close. My father believed he was a good man. Adrian looked at me. Maybe he was once. That answer stayed with me, because life was rarely as simple as good people and bad people. Sometimes people changed. Sometimes choices created consequences they never expected. What happened between them? I asked. Adrian looked at the documents. We are still trying to understand that. I felt frustrated. After 8 years of questions, I finally had pieces of the truth, but not the complete picture. Adrian noticed. I know this is difficult. I looked at him. You know what is difficult? Everyone telling me to move on when nobody knew what I lost. He stayed silent. Not because he had no answer. Because he understood. Claire, he said softly, your father did not disappear because he failed. He disappeared because he was trying to protect what mattered most. Those words reached me differently. For years, I thought my father left behind a broken life. But maybe he had been fighting to preserve something. Maybe he had made choices because of love, not weakness. Later that day, Adrian and I continued reviewing the documents. We discovered that my father had created a private account containing information about the company's history. It was not about money. It was about proving the truth. He wanted the story remembered correctly, I said. Adrian nodded. He wanted people to know who he really was. I looked at him. You understand that. He looked away for a moment. More than you know. That was the first time I realized Adrian was not only helping me because of my father. He was carrying his own memories, his own unanswered questions. Before I left, Adrian handed me the photograph again. Keep it, he said. Why? I asked. Because it connects two stories that were never finished. I looked at the image of my father standing beside his family. For years, I believed my ordinary life was the only thing I had left. Now I realized I had been carrying something far more valuable. A truth. A legacy. A reason why my father trusted me enough to hide it. And as I walked home that night, I understood one thing clearly. The world saw me as just a waitress. But my father had known I was something more. The question was, would I be brave enough to discover why? I used to believe that knowing the truth would make everything easier. I was wrong. Sometimes the truth does not remove the questions you have carried for years. Sometimes it creates new ones that force you to see your entire life differently. After discovering my father's hidden records, I could no longer pretend that my past was something I had left behind. It was still there, waiting. The difference was that now I was finally ready to face it. Adrian and I continued reviewing the documents from my father's private collection. The more we discovered, the more I realized my father had planned everything carefully. He did not leave random pieces behind. He left a path that would only make sense when the right person found it. Your father trusted you more than you realize, Adrian said while looking through the old files. I looked at him. How can you know that? He held up one of the documents. Because he created this system knowing someone would eventually need to understand it. I touched the paper gently. It was strange. For years, I thought my father disappeared and left me with unanswered questions. But maybe he had been trying to communicate with me in the only way he could. Through the truth. Through the evidence. Through the memories he left behind. We spent the next several days following the information he had collected. There were business records, old correspondence, and notes about decisions that had affected both our families. The more we learned, the clearer one thing became. My father's greatest concern was never money. It was people. He cared about who could be trusted, who stood by their promises, who chose honesty when it was easier not to. Your father was different, Adrian said one evening. We were sitting in his office, surrounded by documents and memories from a time before either of us understood what was happening. I smiled slightly. Everyone says that about people after they are gone. Adrian shook his head. I mean it. I looked at him. There was something sincere in his voice. He helped my family when he had no reason to. I studied him carefully. Why does that matter so much to you? Adrian looked toward the city outside his window. For a moment, he looked like someone remembering something painful. Because people like your father are rare. I waited. He saw people before he saw their reputation, before he saw their mistakes. His words were familiar. They sounded like something my father would say. And suddenly I understood why Adrian had been searching for answers. This was not just about helping me. This was about honoring someone who had once believed in him. But as we continued our search, we found something unexpected. A document connecting Richard Hale to a private agreement created shortly before my family's company collapsed. It was not enough to prove everything, but it showed that Richard had known more than he admitted. He was involved, I said quietly. Adrian looked at the document. Yes, but we still need to understand why. That answer mattered. Because Adrian was not trying to create a simple story where one person was blamed for everything. He wanted the complete truth, not a convenient version. You could use your influence to force answers, I said. Adrian looked at me. Would that change what happened? I thought about it. No. Then what matters is discovering the truth without becoming the same kind of person we are trying to understand. I was surprised by his answer. A man like Adrian Montgomery could have chosen the easiest path. Instead, he chose patience. That was when I began seeing him differently. Not as the powerful man everyone talked about, but as someone who was trying to become better than the world expected him to be. Later that week, something changed. We discovered a final message from my father hidden among the documents. It was addressed to me. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. The letter was simple. Claire, if you are reading this, remember one thing. Your value was never connected to our family name. It was always connected to the choices you make when nobody is watching. I read those words several times. My father had known that one day I might believe I lost everything. But he wanted me to understand that I had never lost the most important thing. Myself. Adrian watched quietly as I folded the letter. He knew who you were, he said. I looked at him. What do you mean? He knew you would choose what was right, even when it was difficult. For years, I had thought I became stronger by hiding my identity. But maybe my strength came from refusing to let my circumstances change who I was. Before I left, Adrian looked at me seriously. Claire, there is one more thing you need to know. I stopped. What? He hesitated. Someone else has been searching for these documents. I felt the weight of those words. The truth we were uncovering was important to more people than just us. I looked at the files on the table. My father's secret was no longer hidden. And now we had to discover why someone had spent years making sure it stayed that way. I thought discovering the truth about my father would be the hardest part of my journey. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing that the truth had consequences, and those consequences reached people who had spent years believing the past would remain buried. After Adrian told me someone else was searching for my father's documents, I could not stop thinking about one question. Who else knew what my father had left behind? For years, I believed I was the only person carrying the weight of his unfinished story. Now I understood that other people had been protecting their own version of the past. The next morning, Adrian asked me to meet him at his office. When I arrived, I noticed something different. The atmosphere was quieter than usual. The confidence that normally surrounded him was still there, but there was something else beneath it. Concern. I found another connection, Adrian said. He placed a file on the desk. Between your father's records and a company that still exists today. I opened the file carefully. Inside were documents showing that Richard Hale had continued working with several people connected to my family's business after everything changed. So he moved on like nothing happened, I said. Adrian shook his head. Not exactly. I looked at him. What do you mean? He pointed to another document. He kept records too. That surprised me. I expected someone hiding the truth to destroy evidence. But Richard Hale had kept information. Why would he do that? I asked. Adrian looked thoughtful. Maybe because he was not the only person involved. That possibility changed everything. For so long, I imagined one person responsible for my family's loss. One person who made a choice that changed our lives. But maybe the reality was more complicated. Maybe several people made decisions that created the outcome. Your father understood that, Adrian said. That is why he collected information instead of making accusations. I looked at the papers again. My father had every reason to be angry. Yet he chose patience. He chose proof. He chose truth. He wanted people to understand, not just blame someone, I said. Adrian nodded. Exactly. That was when I realized something about my father. He was not trying to win a fight. He was trying to prevent the same mistakes from happening again. Later that day, Adrian and I visited an old business archive where more records had been stored. The building was quiet, filled with years of forgotten history. As we searched through the files, I noticed something about Adrian. He treated every document carefully. Every name mattered. Every detail mattered. You are different from what people say about you, I told him. He looked at me. What do people say? I smiled slightly. That you only care about results. Adrian looked down at the documents. Maybe I used to. That answer stayed with me, because it showed how much he had changed since the night we met. The man who first appeared as someone with unlimited power was becoming someone who understood responsibility. While reviewing the final records, we found a letter from my father addressed to someone else. Not me. Not Adrian. Richard Hale. I read the first lines carefully. I know you made choices you cannot undo, but I hope you remember the person you were before those choices. I looked at Adrian. My father knew. He nodded slowly. He knew there was more to the story. The letter was not angry. It was not filled with accusations. It was a reminder. My father believed people could make mistakes and still have the chance to choose differently. That was something I had forgotten. The world was easier when people were either good or bad. But real life was more complicated. People could fail. People could regret. People could change. Before we left the archive, Adrian received another message. He read it silently. I watched his expression shift. What is it? I asked. He looked at me. Someone wants to meet. Who? He paused. Richard Hale. My heart changed. After all these years, the person connected to my family's disappearance was finally ready to speak. But I knew better than to expect a simple answer. Truth rarely arrives as one clear moment. It comes in pieces. In memories. In conversations. In the courage to listen when the answer is difficult. As Adrian and I walked back into the city, I realized something important. The woman everyone saw as just a waitress had spent years protecting a truth. But now the truth was no longer something I needed to hide. It was something I needed to understand. And Adrian Montgomery, the man who once stepped into a restaurant to defend my dignity, was now standing beside me as I faced the most important moment of my life. I used to believe that meeting Richard Hale would finally give me all the answers I had been searching for. I was wrong. Sometimes the person who holds the truth is not the person who can explain the pain it caused. Sometimes understanding requires more than facts. It requires seeing the choices people made and the reasons behind them. The day after Adrian told me Richard wanted to meet, I could not focus on anything else. I went through my normal routine, but my mind was somewhere else. Serving tables, greeting customers, cleaning my section. Everything felt familiar, yet nothing felt the same. The woman who once wanted to disappear was now preparing to face the part of her life she had avoided for years. Adrian noticed my silence when we met that afternoon. You can still choose not to do this, he said. I looked at him. After everything we found? He nodded. The choice is still yours. That was something I had learned about Adrian. He never forced people to follow his plans. He gave them choices. Maybe that was because he understood what it felt like when choices were taken away. Why are you really helping me? I asked again. This time, he did not avoid the question. Because your father believed people deserved the truth. And because someone once believed in me when nobody else did. I wanted to ask more, but I knew some stories needed time before they could be shared. We met Richard Hale at a quiet private office outside the city. I expected someone cold. Someone who would defend every decision he made. Instead, I saw an older man carrying years of regret. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. You look like your father. Those words affected me more than I expected. I had spent years hearing my father's name connected to loss. Hearing someone remember him with respect felt different. Why did you agree to meet? I asked. Richard looked down at his hands. Because your father would have wanted the truth to come out eventually. Adrian remained quiet beside me. He was watching carefully, not judging, just listening. Richard explained that the collapse of my family's company was not caused by one person alone. There were mistakes. There were poor decisions. There were people who cared more about protecting their reputation than admitting problems. But my father had discovered that someone was hiding important information from the company board. Your father wanted to reveal everything, Richard said. But he also wanted to protect the employees and families who depended on the company. I felt a deep sadness hearing that. My father had carried so much responsibility. Even when everything was falling apart, he was thinking about other people. Then why did he disappear? I asked. Richard took a breath. Because he realized the truth would only matter if the right people were ready to handle it. I looked at Adrian. Suddenly, I understood the hidden meaning behind my father's choices. He was not waiting for someone powerful. He was waiting for someone responsible. Someone who would choose fairness over revenge. After the meeting, Adrian and I walked through the quiet streets. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I said, I thought finding the truth would make me angry. Adrian looked at me. And now, I looked at the city around us. Now I just feel tired, but also relieved. Adrian nodded. That means you are not becoming the thing that hurt you. His words stayed with me. Because that was the real choice in front of me. I could spend my life holding on to anger, or I could honor my father's memory by choosing something better. A few days later, we decided to release the information publicly. Not to destroy anyone. Not to create another conflict. Simply to correct the story that had followed my family for years. When people finally learned the truth, the reactions were different from what I expected. Some apologized. Some admitted they had judged without knowing the facts. And some simply became quiet. But for me, the most important moment was not seeing other people change their opinions. It was finally accepting my own story. I was not just Claire Bennett, the waitress everyone overlooked. I was also Claire Whitmore, the daughter of a man who believed doing the right thing mattered even when nobody was watching. That evening, Adrian and I stood outside the restaurant where we first met. The place looked exactly the same, but I felt completely different. Do you miss the life you had before? Adrian asked. I thought about it. I miss parts of it, but I do not want to become that person again. He smiled slightly. Why? I looked at him. Because I spent years hiding from my past. Now I know my past is the reason I became who I am. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I would never forget. Everyone else saw a waitress. Your father saw someone worth believing in. I looked at the city lights and realized something. I had spent years thinking I was protecting a secret. But the truth was, the secret had been protecting the person I was always meant to become. I used to believe the moment the truth was revealed would be the moment everything finally felt complete. I was wrong. Some journeys do not end when you find the answers. They end when you understand who you became while searching for them. After my family's story became known, life did not suddenly become perfect. The world did not change overnight. But something inside me changed. For the first time in years, I no longer felt like I was living someone else's life. I was not hiding. I was not running. I was simply Claire Bennett, the woman who had survived every difficult moment without losing herself. The restaurant where I worked continued to be part of my life. I still greeted customers. I still organized tables. I still did the small things I had always done. But people looked at me differently now. Some knew my family name. Some knew the story behind it. But I noticed something important. The people who truly respected me were the ones who had respected me before they knew anything. They saw a person, not a history. That was the kind of respect my father always believed mattered. Adrian's life changed too. The world still saw him as a powerful man. His influence was still there. But I noticed the difference. He listened more. He trusted more. He no longer measured every relationship by what someone could offer him. One evening, we stood outside the restaurant where everything started. The same place where I had once been the woman everyone ignored. The same place where Adrian first saw something in me that I could not see in myself. Do you ever think about that night? He asked. I smiled. More than I expected. He looked at the building. I thought I was protecting you. I looked at him. You were. He shook his head. No. I stopped people from being unfair to you. That was different. I waited for him to continue. You were already protecting yourself. Those words meant more than he knew. Because for years, I thought strength meant never needing anyone. I thought independence meant carrying every burden alone. But Adrian taught me something different. Sometimes strength is not refusing help. Sometimes strength is knowing when someone truly wants to stand beside you. You changed, I told him. He smiled slightly. So did you. I laughed softly. I just stopped hiding. Exactly. He looked at me. That is a bigger change than most people ever make. Months later, I visited my father's old home for the first time since I left. Walking through those rooms felt strange. The memories were still there. The happiness. The uncertainty. The moments I thought I had lost forever. But they no longer controlled me. I found an old notebook in my father's office. Inside was a final message he had written years before. It was not about business. It was not about money. It was about life. Never let the world decide your value. The people who truly know you will see what others overlook. I read those words quietly. My father had understood something before I did. People often judge what they can see. They make assumptions based on appearances, positions, and circumstances. But a person's worth has never been something that can be measured from the outside. I thought about the night people laughed at me. The night they saw only a waitress. They did not see my courage. They did not see my history. They did not see the person my father raised me to become. Adrian once told me everyone saw a waitress, but my father saw someone worth believing in. Now I understood something even deeper. I did not need everyone to recognize my value. I only needed to remember it myself. Adrian and I came from different worlds. He was a man who spent years believing power was the only way to survive. I was a woman who spent years believing disappearing was the only way to stay safe. Somehow, we both learned the same lesson. A person is not defined by what they have lost. They are defined by what they choose to become afterward. Looking back, I thought Adrian was the person who revealed why I could never be overlooked. But the truth was different. He did not reveal my worth. He reminded me that it had always been there. The world saw a waitress. Adrian saw a woman with a story. My father saw a person with purpose. And finally, I learned to see myself the same way.